Fen de Villiers, welcome to the Artisan Parlor.
Thank you so much for having me on.
If you wouldn't mind, you are considered to be one of the preeminent sculptors of the modern era. If you would give people a quick introduction as to who you are, why it is that you're well known, and then we can go from there.
I'm a sculptor that originally sort of started out my life in Scotland. I grew up, with two parents who were sculptors. So I've come from a bit of a lineage of an artistic background, shall we say. I'm sort of fast forwarding everything here, but I pretty much always wanted to do sculpture. I always wanted to be involved in the arts. My parents, my mother specifically, was very, encouraging of me to be involved in sculpture specifically. As from a young age, for example, I was always being given loads and loads of clay and plasticine and encouraged to build things and be engaged with, imagining 3D images, right, which is essentially sculpture, 360 degrees image, and expressing things in three-dimensional form. My earliest memories are really of this. Or whenever we would travel anywhere as well, it was always I always just remember being bought lots and lots of plasticine. It's one of those sort of things. Anyway, fast forward, as I was growing up, I kind of knew that the arts were my thing, and I went to first of all, starting out trying to get into the Glasgow School of Art, which was actually at the time sort of a mistake because it was just a complete mismatch to what I was doing. They were far more conceptual. I was far more interested in actually learning, sort of like the hands-on working with clay, wood, bronze, stone, all of this kind of stuff. And they were more about the sort of, let's say, Duchampian, post-Duchampian found objects kind of art, which was obviously a major clash. It was something that I was never going to, a paradigm I was never going to operate in. I didn't like them. They didn't like me. They couldn't understand what I was trying to do. And I just couldn't really make sense with what they were doing. So I then moved on to an academy in Antwerp in Belgium, where everything sort of made sense. Everything clicked, having arrived at the academy, learning from, let's say, studying Greek sculpture or copies of Greek sculpture in a more sort of academy-based system, going through, studying from life models. All of that started to make sense. I had the grasp of clay in my hand. We were being taught how to carve stone. We were being taught how to work with metal and various other things. And, this was an education that was being taught by older tutors at the time, essentially. These people were in their 60s and 70s. They were coming towards the end of retirement. I managed to grab kind of the last, I think, nuggets of gold that these tutors were able to pass on in relation to sculpture, that only a few years later, after they had retired, they got replaced by a number of considerably younger tutors, and that a lot of that knowledge was kind of being pushed aside. Having gone through that system, I then went on to have some successful shows. I had many different collectors and stuff that would come to me and support my work and was buying into my work, which was an amazing feeling. You graduate, you immediately roll into the gallery scene. You get invited to the cool, trendy parties, and everything's kind of great, right? And you're sort of living that life. What I started to realize, though, very early on, and it was itching at me, was that actually the kind of sculpture that I really wanted to pursue was going to be impossible under the current paradigm and under the sort of blanket system that was allowed to pursue, essentially. Like, I'll give you an example. What I realized was that if you wanted to do any work that somehow glorified, even just dynamic energy or power in aesthetics, even in its most simplest way, it was deemed old-fashioned, and it was deemed even at times kind of quasi-fascistic to be involved in that sort of art. And you have to remember there was also this kind of this trend of like, well, you're a white straight male and you don't really fit the scene, and we don't like what you're you don't fit the demographic of the institutions. You don't fit the trend today, right? And what I also realized is that whenever you wanted to do work that was quite potent or dominant, it it always had to be kind of done in an ironic way. So there was always this sort of lack of sincerity to everything. It was like, if you want to make it in this world, you have to, everything has to be laden in irony, and it has to be kind of silly, and it has to be sort of making fun of our Western tradition canon. If you're going to do anything, it has to be a bit of a ha joke kind of thing. And all of this is, over the years, is gnawing at me, and I found this to be um, exhausting, because I saw it as a dead end, and I saw that artists were being used kind of like mercenaries to just further broader macro agendas by, you know, institutions and galleries that were bought and paid for by certain economic interests. And I didn't really want to play that game anymore. So I released a manifesto, and I went entirely public with my views at my last major solo show. And this was like, what is it, 4 years ago now? Maybe even a bit more. I can't fully remember now. And, I released this, and I kind of have my mission, my moment, because I'm preaching to a group of people, essentially, who, there's that friend enemy distinction that's immediately made, and they sort of say, well, this guy isn't one of us. And we, whatever he has to say or whatever his views are, certainly don't align with us. And then there was a kind of a blanket ban. Media walked away. Everything, every sort of structure of support walked away, apart from just a few people who still said, no, we fully support you, keep going, and all this kind of stuff, which then, led me to go online, where I started to get my message out further online and see that my work was resonating with a larger and larger audience. Actually, a number of my views were resonating with a larger and larger audience, and trying to really push forward to awaken people to just how kind of crippled, controlled, and captured so many of these, so much of the art world has become. And my sort of vision going forward now is really to promote. Look, we don't need these institutions. We don't need these galleries. We can do something else. We can build something else on the outside, as is what's happened in the past. You don't have to play to their game. They have power only because other artists are willing to play into it and go along to get along. Things rapidly change when you've got social media, and you've got the ability to just say, no, we'll just organize our own shows and do our own thing and work with our own patrons and our own supporters and collectors and stuff like that. So here we are now.
I want to come back to institutions, the ready-mades, and then perhaps we might say ideological capture. But I want to stay on your work just for a little bit longer. Kinetic energy, vitality. What are these things, and how do they apply to sculpture?
Well, for me, it's always, my trajectory really has been from looking at, for example, the Italian futurists, the Vorticists, and a number of, let's say, Art Decoists that I think captured implied movement very well, and captured this feeling of dynamism, this feeling of something in motion, something that's being drawn forward or drawn out. You see with a lot of sort of futurist work, there's always this idea of something moving in a direction, right? That's sort of like propulsion or being pushed. And people that know my work will know one of my large monumental works, which is, of course, a motorcyclist in motion, moving at high speed, for example, and that's capturing a sort of trajectory and a kind of emotion that is giving this idea of implied movement. It's being propelled forward. I'm ultimately a sculptor that's fascinated by capturing a moment of something happening in static material. So you get that, you really get that feeling of, okay, this is moving through space. This has just collided with something, or it's gone from point A to point B, and what's happened with the object and the space between those two places. That's what I enjoy. That's what energizes me, because that feeling of motion and that place from point A to point B is capturing movement, and movement is an aspect of the vital, and the vitality is something I've said before, is like humanity, when in movement and when in constant movement, is essentially at its highest peak. It's like, that's like peak performance. Whenever something becomes static in life, it's dying. It's coming. It's not life that is ascending. Essentially, it's life that is going downhill. So it's not the most vital of things. And so I've always tried to express this idea of things in motion, because I think that that's important, and the effect that it has on my body and my mind and my soul when exposed to these things is it uplifts me. I've often said this thing, and it's been quoted in various books, is there's really only two states that art has me in. I can either be, in a state of feeling, when I look at a piece of work, it either lifts me and I feel energized, or it ultimately lowers me and I feel that it's taking life from me. And great art, or even just good art, gives me the feeling in my stomach of being energized. I'm charged by it. And that's what I'm talking about with this vital thing. Now, and of course, that's expressed in aesthetics. If you look at, for example, the way that is expressed, it's expressed in the way a composition is laid out. That energy is felt through the eye, and the sculptor or the person experiencing that piece of sculpture while moving around and looking at a piece of sculpture in 360 degrees. That energy is coming out at you through the composition. You're feeling it. You're feeling that because the rhythm and the way your eye is darting through that crystalline structure of a composition, you're becoming energized by that. Your mind and body is in a sort of sympathetic connection with the work. I mean, that's how I've always experienced sculpture. And it's not like a highly, or art in general, it's not a highly kind of over intellectualized pursuit for me. It's like something either kind of says yes and explodes and it's great, or something just ultimately kind of just dies before you, and you sort of say, no, I'm just not feeling it. It doesn't have that sunlight in it. It doesn't have that juice in it. It doesn't have, that ray that grabs you and intrigues you. And for me, that is specifically energetic work. I mean, just as a thought on that, you would have someone like Alexander Stoddart, the great Scottish sculptor, who I've had conversations with in the past, and he's a sculptor very much on the sort of classical, more neoclassical side of things. And his view is that looking at sculpture, it should put you to sleep. He doesn't believe in the idea that it should really energize you or lift your spirit in that way. He kind of sees that almost as like, no, it should ultimately be putting you to sleep. It should reside in this timeless space that puts you to sleep, and that's it. So he and I would sort of clash on that. I actually think in this moment of time, I believe that art and aesthetics should have a enlivening response, a spirited response. It should be focused on something that is life affirming and powerful, and especially in this day and age now, where everything feels to be in a kind of strange, energetic kind of, where sort of energy has been lowered fundamentally, I think.
Yeah, apathy is the word that comes to mind, especially when it comes to some of the art that lowers you. As a
Yeah.
conversation I've had with many other people in the past, one of the things that I kind of jumped into my mind as you were talking, Greek sculptures and this idea of the ideal,
Mm-hmm.
this idea of celebrating the not just the human body, but a celebration of what almost the human body could be. And I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
does that have any effect on the way that you approach your art form?
Well, the thing is, we at the academy, we studied the Greeks. We studied Roman copies of the Greeks. A lot of people. I mean, I think it's worth that I preface this. A lot of people look to me and they think I'm just some kind of bum modernist that's like arrived out of some hippie art school or something. It's probably because I did go through such an education that I'm I'm now fundamentally interested in the building blocks of form to try and find a somewhat of a fresh way forward from here. And I think what's important, it's important to lay out really my sort of fundamental view on this. It's that, of course, when you look at Greek sculpture, there was this idea of the ideal, especially when you look towards their more classical and Hellenistic works. And you look at the works of Polykleitos, for example, who had the canon, which was like this ideal of measurement. The Greeks were also known for finding life models, for example, who had, for example, the most beautiful hands or the most beautiful feet, and the most beautiful proportions, and copying them into one singular figure to try and find the most ultimate and most beautiful balance of the human form. And that, of course, this is an ideal. This is almost this is a spiritual ideal, right? It's also probably tied into their genetic way of thinking as well, although we don't have to get into that. But they obviously were very much interested in this perfection, right? This perfection of form and aesthetic. And what I find is I find all of that absolutely fascinating. And my trajectory, having gone through that, where you sort of study from those forms, is that I saw within the early modernists a lot of things that in my mind, made me think about early civilizations, and it made me think about the early geometric period of, for example, the Greeks or other civilizations. And if you map the sort of civilization and aesthetic trajectory of the Greeks, for example, you had the geometric, the archaic, the classical, and the Hellenistic. And I've had this thing that's been itching away at me for a long time, and I'm starting to piece together a bit of a theory on it, or at least an aesthetic trajectory on it, is that I view a lot of what was happening with early modernism, with the geometric and the pure forms, as being our fundamental modern sort of restarting of that geometric period. Let's say it was like a revisiting of that. You had a lot of avant-gardists that were interested in that geometry, and now a lot of people will immediately say, well, geometric, that's Picasso. But the geometric is an ancient thing. It's not something that I immediately tie to Picasso. It's not something I immediately tie to Braque or this sort of stuff. I actually tie it to, if you study really the canon, the Western canon, and even outside of that, we can see that the geometric is actually an ancient thing because it is the fundamental crystalline structure behind composition. And so if you, for example, look at the Vorticists, a lot of what they were doing was almost like this metaphysical structure behind actually form of what would then be considered more refined form that could hang on to that. And so my view is that we don't necessarily have to go back, although it's important to look at all of, it's important to study. It's important to study these guys. But a lot of it was, I think, already in aspects re-emerging and being seen again through that, through that early sort of modern period. So the thing that I'm often pushing is this idea of you should learn the fundamental building blocks of form and composition. And my trajectory through that has been, looking at, for example, the Italian futurists, the Vorticists, aspects of the Art Decoists, and seeing that, look, what they had right from the get-go was extraordinarily strong composition. And I mean, I've had people say to me, I don't really like the absolute finish or aesthetic of what you're doing, but I don't know what it is. There's just something like strong or powerful about it that I kind of enjoy. And I'm like, yeah, because what you're seeing is like a fundamental compositional play in 360 degrees. And you're watching me map. And in my lifetime, my vision is to map from the geometric to the archaic, to the classical, and to the Hellenistic, of a line and a synthesis of taking futurism, Vorticism, and aspects of the Art Deco, which is the refined elements of all those things, and finding a fresh, something of a fresh vein in the sculptural world. we could simply just do regurgitations of the Greeks. We could do that. But I don't think that I don't think that's getting our hands dirty fundamentally with pursuing aesthetics at its deepest level. I don't think we're going to get a fresh synthesis out of that. We have to, going forward now, and as I'm already doing with other, painters and draftsmen, is I think we need to fundamentally get into and practice these things. And that doesn't mean theorizing. That means working in close proximity with getting through the material, understanding the Western canon, understanding the trajectory, and finding where it goes from here. Because for the best part of 80 years, I feel, say 80, 60 years, whatever, it's been in somewhat of arrested development. I feel like a lot of things have not been. I feel like things haven't really been allowed to go forward from here. If you see, for example, 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, I just feel like, man, there was just so much material that could have been taken much farther, and it just wasn't. So that's my general kind of view on it.
I want to come back to some of these adjectives that you're using. Vitality, um, power was one that came up. And one of the accusations that continuously comes at people who, let's say, put forward this vision into the future is that if you are of a, let's say, certain persuasion, there is this instinct to say, this is fascistic. This is, Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Nazism. This idea of ideals, sort of quasi, maybe even Nietzschean. We decide our own values. Moral relativism, might makes right. Uh, what is your response to critics when these things come your way?
I mean, look, I've had this thrown at me by the left wing establishment for, well, since I can really remember, to be honest with you. I've also had it thrown at me from various people who are apparently or supposed to be on our side of things. So I'm criticized from both left and sort of conservative circles or such like that, because they say, oh, well, this leads to a very authoritarian aesthetic, or this leads to, I think ridiculously, the gates of Auschwitz or something like that, which I mean, I just think is just utter madness. Really, it's it's if you have that line of thinking, there are so many people who I think are trapped in very linear thought, and they will say something like, well, you can't explore that because we know where it goes. And then I'm also then caught in this idea, well, history doesn't repeat itself in that in exact manners, because contexts have changed, people have changed, things have changed. And also, I'm not like, I wouldn't say that my vision is, oh yeah, let's just focus entirely on, I don't know, Arno Brecker sculpture, or let's entirely focus on just Italian futurism, or Italian futurism when it became fascistic or something, all of these kind of things. It's like, no, I think you should be able to also enjoy the aesthetic and be able to step away from a lot of the political happenings that took place. You have to think about in London, 1970s, 1980s London, what you had is at Central St. Martin's. My mother, for example, tells a very interesting story of this. When she was studying sculpture, she spoke about what it was like when she was studying there, and the figure was essentially forbidden, right? The execution of the figure in sculpture was essentially forbidden. And the thing that a number of the tutors kept on coming back to was that, oh, well, it's too close to this idea of sort of like the ideal, and it's too close to fascism, and it's just, you just think to yourself, man, I don't know how these people can sort of tie themselves in knots. It's just never really made sense to me, because I've also been very much inspired by the Russian futurists. I've also been very inspired by aspects of Russian sculpture, and I never look at those aesthetics and go, oh yeah, because that piece of sculpture has aspects of plenularity to it. If I make this, we're going to have communism. Or I don't look at When when I say make a rendering in a more kind of realist or Art Deco, I don't look at that and go, well, this is going to invoke National Socialism. I mean, it's just mad. For me, it's just madness, and it's lazy thinking, and it's a lazy sort of intellectualizing, and it usually comes from circles that are not even that involved in actually making things. So no, I don't think by making powerful sculpture or looking at even aspects of the ideal or anything like that, I don't think it's going to invoke some kind of ultra oppressive state. No.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to point out, and this I know you understand, but for anybody listening, this is how nuancing works. So, one of the things that people often have a bad habit of doing is they would look at something like Nazi Germany or Mussolini's fascist Italy or Stalin's Russia, and they put a big box around it that says bad, and they put that on a shelf, and that's where it's left. So anything associated with that automatically becomes bad. But one of the things that all three governments recognized um, in a profound way was how important art was, to the point that they were very careful about what kind of art that they wanted to bring up for their civilization. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. This is sort of like the Hitler drinks water fallacy, where it's like, okay, well, if you drink water, Hitler drank water as well. Well, what does that make you? It's an unequal equivalency. That's one way of thinking about that.
Yeah.
But on the flip
Yeah.
end, jumping to institutions further west, one of the things that has cropped up as a result of perhaps not taking art as seriously as we should is something like a ready-made sculpture, which I've talked about before, but I am curious to get your take on it, because I continuously see this in colleges, wherever I go, whenever I lecture, whenever I visit. I always see this. So I'm just really quickly would love to get your take.
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, the ready-made and the trajectory of the ready-made, some people map it to Marcel Duchamp or Duchamp. They will say, well, that's how it kind of kicked off with him, with his fountain sculpture, which was obviously a pissoir, and somewhat, people would say like, oh, when that was shown, when that was shown, it was radical, right? When that was shown, I mean, look, I'm it was a radical statement, and he had his reasons for doing it. He felt the art world had become far too sort of bourgeois, and there was, the sentiments around things at that time, and he wanted to attack in a very aggressive and poetic way. Now, I think at its time, it had some force and it had some power, and he documented how it went in. How he tried to get it into a museum, and there's a whole story around it anyway. But it had its place and its dynamic of what was happening then. What is unforgivable in many respects is that the idea of the found object, now over 100 years later, the ready-made, the assemblage, this sort of object that we find and we call a piece of art because the artist calls it a piece of art, it's really overplayed now, and it's become extraordinarily long in the tooth. And it's what I've often found with the ready-made is that it's used by people who ultimately want to throw some sort of petty political message on it and then masquerade it as a work of art. And it's really just used as a crowbar that is now shotgunned out into multiple museums and galleries to push new left political sort of agitational nonsense, right? So, you can never really look at it as a serious. It's not a serious piece of work. It's not something serious. It's always based and wrapped in irony, or maybe it is serious. And there's like a massive essay on the wall that you have to kind of read through to try and imagine or understand where they're coming from. And it's usually based around, a series of different things related to gender identity and related to colonialism or different things like that. And of course, the institutions love it because it's very quickly made It's very quickly shotgunned out. You can put it anywhere and it becomes, oh, it's an art piece and it's an artwork and blah, blah, blah. And then if you question it, they'll say, the sort of intellectual minds among it will say, oh, but you just don't understand it. This is genius. This is brilliant. You just don't get it, And, it's ultimately, I'm amazed actually that it still has the power that it does. But on the flip side of that, I'm actually very glad to see that there's also various different people who are becoming aware of this stuff. And I think going forward, there's going to be a shift. I think there's going to be quite a change. I don't think this is going to have as much potency as it has had for the last, what is it now? Yeah, it's been good. You've seen a real ramping up of it, I would say, over the last 40 years. It's been heavily used to push specifically kind of left-wing ideas.
Well, on that point, I did want to talk to you more about intellectual, ideological, institutional capturing. I'd like to read you a quote. This is from you. As these bloated cultural institutions start to feel the pressure, they will be forced to bring quality or they will rightfully die. Perhaps many of them begin to realize that endlessly pushing critical race theory or anti colonialism propaganda is simply a collection of visionless, dead end tropes. Nothing of substance can be built or sustained within this current ideological paradigm. A shift is coming. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
I think ultimately the political fabric of, I think, America at this point in time is becoming acutely aware of what's happened to their institutions. And let me lay it out to give you some context here. 1980s, 1990s America, Reagan America, you had a right-wing government and a right-wing financial system, but you had a new left captured institutional backbone. And it didn't really matter if the politics or the financial system were conservative or what we'd say right wing or whatever. As long as the new left occupied the institutions, the very fabric and nature of a country and the mind, the macro mind, was ultimately going to be subverted to the aims of this, new political direction, what we call the new left. Quite different to the old left. And what we have now is again, this idea of history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it most certainly rhymes. And what we have now is we have a populist America that has started to become acutely aware, thankfully, and importantly, acutely aware of the cultural fabric, how institutions operate, what they push, what they're doing to the minds of young people, what they're doing to our next generation of artists, what they're doing to our next generation of visionaries and thinkers. And they're starting to realize, look, if we don't somehow grab power here or somehow alter the way things have been operating, then whatever we put in place, you're always building it on quicksand. You're ultimately just building it on very weak foundations. And it's refreshing because I am starting to see there's a genuine awakening here where you're starting to see people on the more conservative side of things saying, hey, culture is really important. The institutions are really important. My battle since I basically came online was to endlessly, try and show people what's really going on in the arts institutions, what's really happening, from the art schools to the museums to the galleries, while also talking about my own work, but really sort of trying to get people to realize, look, this rot is there, and you can say this culture or this art is bad, but whether you like it or not, it's having a fundamental effect on the minds of people, because the aesthetic and the cultural aspect here is paramount. It's paramount, right? It's like you have to understand that all of these things that are getting pushed out there through media, through art, through the music industry, all these different things are making people see the world down a slanted and ideological stance that is obviously to the new left's advantage. Now, what do we see going on in America? I think it's very exciting. I think America now ultimately needs to try and figure out the direction that they want to take things culturally. What is American exceptionalism? What does it mean? What is the relation to the American frontier? What is America going forward in this technological age? What does it mean for America to go further into space? The West, the Western mind, the Faustian spirit. What does that look like in art and culture? It's a far greater story to tell than endlessly navel gazing at the oppressed and the oppressor conception that I think tears a country apart. And its only idea really is to foment what they would consider revolution. And we've been in this state now of practically endless revolution in their minds. But there's no vision there. There's no end, there's no spirited end point that you can say, oh, well, it'll be great when we get there. I mean, their idea is when we get there, there'll be more equality and yet even more. And then once we get there, there'll be less oppression and even more equality. And this mindset, it's actually visionless. The most important thing now going forward for America is to find out what those stories are and run forward, try and get the best minds, try and get the best artists within America to start feeling that out musically, in the land of painting, in the land of sculpture, in architecture. What is that now? What does it look like? What, as I said before, there's been this process of arrested development. The new left capturing of the institutions and the art schools has been a process of arrested development. What does it look like when you throw that off? You better have an answer to this. It's something I also stated on Twitter a number of times, and it got some traction with different people. Is those who can show a far greater vision going forward ultimately command the future. And until you can throw whatever you believe is a more noble idea forward and show it and lead from the front, none of this is going to change. And so that is, I think America is at a crucial cultural moment right now, as it's starting to realize that the only way forward here is going to be, grabbing hold of a far greater vision. And believe me, if they don't, the left is already, the sort of new left are already very, very, very much working on something else. So, it's key. And the idea that you can just say, well, all the greatest works of the past have already been made, we just need to focus on that, which a lot of conservatives do. Sure, they're great works, but we need to throw it forward. We need to see where this is going. And we can't simply just say, well, we've got this great work, we'll just keep on looking at that. No, that's static. The vital man keeps dreaming and moving and going forward and stepping forward and thinking forward. And that's the important thing.
That's such an excellent point. One of the criticisms I and others I've been working with have received is that there's a sense of self-assured, almost arrogance. And for me, I can understand why that criticism gets thrown my way, because I am 26, and if a 26-year-old walks up to you and says, I think I have a vision moving forward, I can understand why there'd be some trepidation for that. But on the other hand, if you are going to put forward a vision and, like you say, lead from the front and move in a direction that is good and true and beautiful, there does need to be a sense of confidence. And that's not to say that there won't be missteps along the way, or dumb things get said or created. But if you're going to lead, you have to actually do things and, again, put that vision forward that people can join in behind. It's one of the reasons why criticism, and I've said this many times before, but criticism in a vacuum ultimately is useless. It has to be utilized in a way that gets people moving in a direction that is positive, because the criticizer also understands that same vision, something like that. Now, contrasting that, we've mentioned America, and I completely agree. By the way, America is at a pivotal point. It's tragic
Pivotal.
what's been happening, but it's also exciting to see people waking up to what has been happening for many years. Um, Contrasting that though with the UK, I don't live in Britain. There was a point in time where I almost applied to the Royal Conservatory of Music in
Hmm.
London, and there were some events that happened not related to that, but within the city that I ultimately decided not to bring my wife over. So
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, could you
Probably not a bad
give
idea.
yeah could you give people a sense of kind of what's going on there since you are working?
Well, I mean, I'm actually working in Belgium, but I'm very close
Okay.
to. I'm actually very close to London. I go through there and meet up with an arts group that was put together by a good friend of mine called Matthew the Stoat. You might be aware of Matthew the Stoat. He's on Twitter. Um, but no, I mean, I go through there regularly, of course, and I catch up with what they're doing. But from a cultural standpoint, from a macro standpoint, Britain, England, it's in a very, very difficult position right now. And there, of course, there is change. There are, you are seeing extraordinary amounts of people, who have had enough and who want to see dramatic change. And my major focus, along with other artists, is where do things go culturally, where do things go artistically. You know, it's something that we look at quite a lot, and we've basically come to this idea that whatever probably is going to happen in the UK is going to have to be fundamentally started by a small group of artists, small groups who will, not just us, but hopefully others, who will start showing different sort of artworks, different visions, different ideas outside of the institutions, because the institutions are buttoned up and entirely controlled and captured. And it's going to be this process of really trying to start up a different scene, a different art scene, from everything from music um, to exhibitions, gatherings, all of this stuff. This is all really vital, and you need to be able to get people together who say, "Look, we align with this sort of culture. We're not interested in the kind of status quo and the standard nonsense that's peddled out through the institutions and a lot of the galleries." You have to kind of start just living this other way and championing another way. Britain does not at all have. Um, we don't have political individuals who are in power to be able to have any control over the institutions. So there's no way that we can put any pressure to try and peel back a lot of this ultra progressive new left nonsense that's still really corrupting for example, the Arts Council England, or the major institutions, and that then filters down into a lot of the different art galleries, right, and sets the tone and sets the trend for things. We don't have that ability. That's not something that we have. um, but we can at least have small groups that are forming and doing different things and getting very passionate about the aesthetic side and the artistic side of things. And I think just coming together and just being able to share those thoughts and beliefs is so vital, because there is such a feeling of atomization. I mean, I know it myself. Like, I've had moments where I sometimes step back and I'm like, man, I'm just like this weird guy, like, out in Belgium, trying to push forward with this other way and this other kind of approach. And then you've got this collective in London, which I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that you guys exist, because I can go through and catch up with them, and you don't feel as sort of cut off, right? And atomization, if left for too long, is it's deadly. Actually, it's deadly. You have to find your tribe, your group. You have to find people that you ultimately are ultra energized by. That is just of utmost importance right now. And I think that's really what we are as artists focusing on. That's the key thing.
There was something I wanted to ask you about because I think I have heard you talk about this before. This is something that I've been off camera, been trying to get some people on board with. I almost had a conversation about this with a guy named James Zimmerman, who's a wonderful clarinet player and a very masculine individual. Uh, masculinity in the arts. One
Hmm.
of the things that I think people chafe at with you when you talk about power and vitality and the
Hmm.
ideal, um, carving out the body from stone, is that if you are of a, how do I put this gently? A little, let's say, light in the loafers. You're friends with Dorothy. This is not. You're not of the, let's say, most masculine persuasion you're going to chafe at. But guys, even if they're not artists, resonate with that. They resonate with this idea of men carving out a vision in the arts for the future that is good. So, what is masculinity in art, and how does that? Uh, how can we begin to understand that and help people navigate around this idea?
I mean, look, something that I've always found when looking at a number of my heroes is that that piercing dedication to the creative arts is fundamentally a very male thing. Now, there are some women who also match into this dedication, but it's fundamentally a lot of the time driven by a very masculine urge, right? To set yourself before a material and shape it with your hands, with your body, is a very, I think, much more masculine driven thing to do. Carving blocks of stone that are 3 to 5 tons, lifting heavy weights, that moving metal around, being involved in that stuff. It's not something that I ever really saw women gravitating towards. But also on that note, the long hours, the waking up early, going to your studio, dedicating yourself to it day after day, 6 to 7 days a week, early mornings, late nights, you continually keep on going. Um, Testosterone drives that. I'm sorry, but like it does. And the arts and being involved in the arts is also a competitive thing. And we can look back through history, for example, at the Renaissance period, when you look at the patrons and what they were doing with their artists and how they would create competitive environments where they were really looking to try and get the best artifact that could be made. Those men were competing with one another to get the greatest thing that they could get, that was, also a devotion to the divine, but it was also competing amongst one another to say, oh, you've done that, well, I can do it better, and I can do this, and I can. This is something that I fundamentally also feel has neutered the arts, because what you've seen, and I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but you'll see why I'm doing it, is that what you've seen is that through the institutions, because of the new left capture, because of so much of the gutting of our institutions, the dying of the guild systems, the ultimate gutting and destruction of the academy system, the true academy system, and everything has been kind of leveled out and everything has been democratized. They love this thing. We're democratizing the arts. You've taken away a key element. You can no longer judge what is strong, what is powerful. You can no longer have an aesthetic judgment on, oh, that composition ultimately is strong, or there's power to it. It's all about, well, anything goes now. It's very much more of a feminine mindset. Let's all go along to get along. We're all a friendly little group here. Everything's fine. Competition and being too boisterous, that could lead to, bad things. You see that kind of, that energy, that force has gone through so many of the institutions, and it's cut out that very important thing of men being men among one another and competing to get the best thing that they could. I, for so many years, have ultimately just been in a sort of a monologue with myself, struggling away, honestly, but speaking to ghosts, speaking to the futurists, speaking to the vorticists, speaking to the Art Decoists, reading through some stuff that they've left in conversations or manuals, looking at this stuff and saying, what would he say? What would he think about that? What would he perhaps think about this piece that I'm working on? What would Henri Gaudier-Breschke would have said about that? What would Wyndham Lewis have maybe said about this piece? And that's what's been, occupying my mind. And still having that relentless thing of that we must go on again. You go to sleep, you rise, get out there and you go again and you go again and you go again and you keep on returning. And you do it because you are driven to create, because you must create, because ultimately life without it isn't worth living. It's not worth going on in this time. It's the ultimate fire that we gather round. And again, to this point, why do you always focus on masculinity? Take away the masculine element and you will not have great art. Take away the masculine energy, the focus and the piercing drive, and you will not have had anything close to the genius in sculpture that we've seen over the last years. I'm sorry. You can joke about it and say, "Oh, I don't like the word, it's silly." Well, maybe you don't like the word and maybe you don't like, it being thrown around, but it's a fundamental aspect. I think that people who endlessly attack it are just part of this postmodern irony. They're just not serious individuals. You either get serious or you'll be stepped over. And that's just how it is, because there's going to be people who are going to do it and they're going to keep moving forward and you can keep laughing at them. But, the people who get up every day and dedicate their lives to something, they're going to achieve it. So, maybe you should apply yourself to just pursuing those things in a piercing way and be competitive amongst your artist friends and drive each other on. That's important.
It's such a great point. The other thing that I would add to that as a complementary side piece would be this idea of risk taking.
Yes.
This idea of men coming together saying, okay, we've got this giant ocean in between us. All right, I'm going to get my bed sheet. We're going to take a couple trees, chop them down. We're going to make a boat, and we're going to hope that the wind carries us, navigating by the stars. Maybe we'll get there in 3 to 6 months if we don't die from disease or the ocean sweeps us away or pirates don't set upon us. There's something about that. And I think I've really come to understand this just being married. My wife, who is incredible, is not a risk taker in the same way that I am a risk taker. She likes security. The way that I achieve security in that marriage is by taking risks outside of the home and taking the wins of that and then bringing it back, something like that. So again, back to this idea, some people who are not predisposed to understanding that's going to be a foreign idea. But I would encourage anybody who's listening who maybe chafes at this idea, you don't have to necessarily accept it right now, but at least consider what that means for the way that not only culture but civilization develops, because you can't have a great culture without having a great civilization, and vice versa. Cultures without, or civilizations without cultures rather, die. They become stagnant if they're not producing great things. And if you want civilization to thrive, the culture must thrive through that mindset, something like that.
Absolutely. And just to again, slightly round off the point here, it's like the people who laugh at these sorts of this sort of wording, a lot of the sort of people within the regime art scene and even some people on our side, I just don't think, I think they need to look at the frame that they're coming at a lot of the world with. If you find the word masculine or masculinity or power or powerful, or if you find these words ironic or silly or funny, I'm sorry, like you've been had. You're done. If we can't talk about these archetypal moving principles that have literally shaped who we are, our cultures going forward, all those different things, I don't know what to say to you. Like I really don't know what to say to you. You've been had by critical theory. You've been had by Herbert Marcuse. You've been had by a lot of these institutional new leftists who have made you laugh at these words, and they've left something in your mind that makes you think in a rather unserious manner. And I say this because there's a lot of young guys who I think are somewhat on the right path, but they're infected with this endless feeling of irony, and they sort of like that. Oh well, I could do that, or maybe it'll be perceived as too serious, or oh no, I can't do that because what will they think? And the fundamental thing is it's those people who go out and, as you said, take risks, go and do things, go and make stuff happen in the world. It's those people that will ultimately shape whatever comes next. Go and do it. Go and be laughed at. Put yourself in a position where people are going to make fun at you because you're probably on the right path. Go into a place that's going to make you feel uncomfortable, right? I mean, I'm a sculptor. I never really chose this path that I'm on now. I had this, my ultimate vision, and it's something that I've shared with only just a few people, is that when I started out as a sculptor, I ultimately just wanted to be able to carve stone, make my sculpture, have a wife and children, and just kind of just live my life. And the thing that I often come back to is they chose violence. I didn't. And the point is, what I mean by that is they brought the fight to me. The institutions and these, this ideology was brought to me. And now I'm in a process of saying, we're going to have to defend ourselves. We're going to have to fight our way through this if we want to have something greater in the future. I didn't think as a sculptor, I'd be standing in front of, a few hundred people at a time, delivering speeches around the world, talking about the importance of aesthetics or what's going on in the institutions, all this kind of stuff. I ultimately thought I'd just be involved in doing what I'm doing, but I've realized out of necessity that we must get out there doing things if there's going to be any change. We can have constant quibbles online and we can have constant little fights, but until people have actually got boots on the ground doing things, nothing changes here.
And I would just like to highlight some of the speeches that you've given. I've watched a few on YouTube in preparation for this conversation. There was one in particular I really enjoyed. It was titled "The Artistic Arms Race." So
Yeah.
anybody who wants to go and listen to more of you, I know you have a website and a YouTube channel, but those speeches as well, I would really encourage people to listen to because they're really quite excellent. Two more things I wanted to ask you. You have a commissioned work in the United States in South
Yeah.
Carolina, I believe. Yes.
Yep, that's correct.
Can you talk a
I'm
little bit
busy.
about that and when it's coming out?
Yeah, I'm busy working on that right now. So it's still, what people really need to understand is whenever you're working on a commissioned work, when it comes to bronze sculpture at that kind of scale that's going outside, there is so much stuff from preparation to planning to working with civil engineers and finding out how the piece is going to exactly be anchored to the stone and all of these different things. And so, then the different funding brackets and then okaying it with the local government and the council and all these different kind of things. So we're still probably about another year to year and a half out for completion. I'm still in the process right now of making the small models, the small maquettes, finding exactly the right sort of aesthetic direction. The aesthetic direction ultimately is a strong focus on the more refined language, something that you would probably have seen more in, say, American Art Deco period 1930s. And I think that approach is fitting. It's kind of a classical modernism in many respects. I find it fitting. It's depicting a sower, depicting a man stepping forward and sowing seeds. There's ultimately a lot of meaning to the sower, right? It's an archetype of our Western canon. It's this idea. Some relate it to the parable of the sower, right, which is obviously the more spiritual meaning. Others would look at it more as this idea of like ultimately planting ideas for change going forward, or this idea of looking into the future. A people do not plant seeds unless they dream of a greater tomorrow, is what kept on coming into my mind when working on this piece, which is something for me. When I was working with my good friend Matthew the Stoat, who aided me with a lot of the conceptual drawing side of things when we were going backwards and forwards. He was coming up with stuff that I just loved. It was almost this idea of like a man planting a city, a man planting a cityscape, or this idea that the sower is like this huge archetypal force. And what I wanted to that never really got into the final piece, but I just love the dreaming behind that. And what I have now sort of pushed more for, and I think it's more fitting for the development, the housing development there, is it's the sower as a figure encapsulates everything from as his foot is stepping forward, it's parting the ground, and it's tilling the soil. So his foot is essentially, it's parting the ground. So he's the machine. He's essentially like also part of this idea of the machine, but he's also an archetypal force. And I wanted to capture that more of a kind of a macro view. It's not just a little man, a little farmer or something. It's more that spirit of planting and growth and change, and sort of the poetry around that. That's what I really wanted to capture. And then again, very much like what I always try to do, implied movement. He's casting the seeds out. The seeds are flowing out of his hands, I'm going to make a real point of capturing that in a very pleasing and beautiful way, because I love this idea that you're capturing the motion sculpturally. You're capturing that motion of the seeds flying out, and there it lives. That poetry lives in 360 degrees. That story is told. That public sculpture then tells that story. So it's very exciting. It's great to be able to get this commission. A lot of the work that I do is often put into private collections, private sculpture gardens, and stuff like that. So it never gets the impact of being out in the open. So this is really exciting. This is really, really exciting, and I'm so glad that the developers, Keen Development Group, are, they're a young team, and they're so aligned. This idea of it's important to live in and around beautiful things. It's important to live in and around uplifting stories, and a sculpture is a story told in a static material, and that's for all to share in, for all to be part of, and that's important. I think that's this is fundamentally why when we think about public sculpture, it's like when it's just some weird kind of ugly thing that you see put together these days, people pass it on the street, and it's more of a curse actually than anything. It's not uplifting them. And going back to the what we said at the beginning, a piece of sculpture either lifts me or lowers me, and a piece of art. And the aspiration is ultimately that a piece of work would lift you. It would inspire you. So that's really the thinking behind it.
That's well said. I'm very excited to see it. I live about 2.5 to 3 hours away from
Oh
Greenville. I live in
wow!
Georgia. So when I
Oh,
saw not
fantastic!
only that you were doing it, but where it's going to be, I thought, oh my gosh, this is really exciting. So when it debuts, I'll definitely do everything in my power to be there. I'm very excited to see that.
That's going to be amazing. Yeah, because there will be an official sort of event held when it gets put there, and I'll deliver a small speech about it, and yeah, it'll be great to meet everyone that comes over to do that. Yeah, it'll be fun. I really enjoyed it actually. That the last time I was in Greenville, it was fantastic because we did this small public event where we were, just talking about the project coming to Greenville and all this kind of stuff, and I couldn't believe how many people travelled to come and see me at this event, and they were like, "Oh, we drove from, we're out of town," and and I'm like, "Wow, this meant so much to me actually," and it's something that I really adore, and I want to get this. I want to get this out there. It's important. When it comes to the Americans, the thing that I love about the Americans is they have, well, at least the ones that I've come in contact with, they have a can-do attitude. They have got a wonderful spirit of teamwork, and maybe that's just because I've met guys from our side, and they're more sort of healthy and spirited or whatever. But I speak with these people, and I say to them, I said, you are. I see these guys and I say, you are inspiring me, because you are ultimately, you know the importance of teamwork, and you know the importance of, getting behind things and moving and making things happen. And they back people with the confidence to stand up and say, this is an idea that I have. And maybe it's a mad idea, but they'll, like, the Americans are just kind of like, oh, sure. I mean, sounds great. Let's go. And you just think, we just don't, like, I find it tragic. We do not have that sort of mindset in Europe. There is a fracturing element in Europe. There's multiple different languages. There's a malaise. You have it in small circuits. I have it in small groups in England and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, whenever I go through to America, I go through and I essentially, I recharge. I come back, and my wife, she talks to me. She's like, oh, you're so full of energy. And I'm like, yeah, because I feel like anything's possible. When I'm amongst these sorts of people, anything is possible. You could get it done. You can get it done. And it's a breath of fresh air. it's a breath of fresh air coming from a milieu that has just so much of an arrested mindset for growth or pushing forward on something. It's extraordinary. So I take my hat off to you as Americans. I really do.
I appreciate that. I'll ask my last question in a second, but it's nice to hear. I have a lot of European friends, obviously, and I really love working with them. And so many great artists come from Europe. And this is not a criticism on either you or them, but
Mhm.
there are people from outside the United States that I've had the pleasure of coming in contact with who do have a more cynical attitude. And it's not that, one of the great things about especially British humor is that sort of cynical, wry, sort of dry. It's very funny, but on the flip end of that, a good joke sometimes has a little bit of truth in it, and I wouldn't want to see, especially a place like the UK, which is such a, I mean, the history of that the country alone is so incredible.
Mm,
I would hate to
sure.
see a loss of pride in your country. I've never viewed that as a bad thing, and I don't like to see when people denigrate their own country like that. I don't think it's healthy.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely not. No, I think there's a look. There's great things about it. There's great things about the UK. There's great things about Europe. The thing that I do find though is they're just, I don't know what it is. Even though America has been going through a hard time, and I've been in America at different times. Even when it was going through a hard time, there was still just people that I was like, wow, you just keep going, and you've got this energy. And maybe it's the climate, maybe it's the sunlight. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
Maybe like maybe, I mean, I come from Scotland originally, so like for me, um, I don't know. Maybe there's just a difference in climate there. I mean, I don't know what it is, but there is something that I find inspiring, and I think there is, that this is obviously for a completely different conversation, but there is something to be said about so many of the sort of madmen and vitalists and energetic people left Britain and Europe and formed America and went out and conquered that place. And I think there's something of a genetic memory within those people that uh, the that Faustian spirit burns on. And I've had conversations at times where if you think about when you think about Europe, you think World War One, World War Two, the massacring of some of our best. This has to have had a genealogical issue. It's had something. It's taken away some of our best, I think. And you know, sometimes I find that might directionally be part of the macro issue. I'm not sure, but there is something there. I think Europe's going to make it through, and I think Britain's going to make it through. But there are times where I'm sort of like, wow, where is that? Where is that fire? Where is that strength? Um, but all I can say is I'm inspired by the small groups of people that I connect with in Britain and Europe. I think they keep me going. And when I get through to America, which is relatively often, I get a real boost. So yeah.
One of the issues that comes up with especially artists who merely theorize is that there isn't a practical application to what people can take away. And I'm never quite sure who's watching these episodes. I know it's a combination of artists and laymen, but I like to ask the guests that I'm speaking with, what is a practical application that people can take away, not only from this conversation, but just practical advice that you'd like to give people that they can enact in their own lives.
I had a conversation recently where someone was asking me, they said, Fen, when do you feel like there is a element of the divine at play within art? What was my view as a sculptor? And I said that what makes me believe in the divine is the process of being in the creative zone, and the idea that when you apply yourself to a material, be it you know writing music, playing music, carving stone, working with clay, if you come back day after day with dedication, without distraction, you will notice creeping into your life a series of events where you start to realize that you're focus is increasing and you're getting into deeper and deeper states of creation. And when you get into some of these highest or higher states of the zone, the creative zone, that feeling where everything is just right. Everything is just right. You know, things are just happening and it's working out, and you're ultimately following, you're serving something in that creative process. And that's what they call the creative zone. You know, people talk about this from all kinds of things. And you surprise yourself and you step back one day and you go, I didn't make that. Or I wasn't consciously aware of that moment of creation, but something else was there. And the takeaway for me is apply yourself, cut out the distraction, apply yourself to the material. Whatever you're doing, you're trying to master something. The arts ultimately is an elitist pursuit. Let's never forget that. You will be aided by whatever you believe in, a higher force. If you some people on our side say, oh, I don't believe in God, or I believe in the gods, or whatever, right? But something else comes into your locale or around you. And once you've been in the zone for a while, you leave and you have this magnetic energy that carries with you, and others feel that, and you notice it in your life. You're energized by that creative process, and that energy, it's a divine sort of energy. It's blissful. It's a blissful energy. And I think that what is so hard to do in this time, because we do have so many distractions, because social media plays such a huge part. It really is everywhere now. These distractions, the pinging of the phone. Try to switch it off. Try to step away for 4, 5, 6 hours of a day and focus yourself on a material. And if you have that fear of it's not going to be good enough or whatever, apply yourself every day and you will be aided. There's going to be another force that will come around you and aid you. So,
Fen de Villiers, thank you so much. That's a wonderful thing to leave people with. People can find you, I know, at your website, as well as your YouTube channel, as well as your X profile. You have a great following. I'm looking forward to seeing your continued work. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David.